There are a lot of systemic barriers. And I think my perspective is the more we focus on those barriers, the more we focus on the problems, we're actually creating or perpetuating more of that problem or more of that challenge. And so it's not to bypass it and avoid it and ignore it and pretend that it's not there. Like, we're not talking about denial. We actually want to identify and acknowledge what is real and what is true, but we don't want to overly identify with it as a means to keep limiting us and to keep holding ourselves back. And
You're listening to RezToCEO. Your host, Trent Billette. Don't forget to subscribe and listen. Rachel, I just say thank you for being here on my podcast today. And so I just wanted to ask you, you have built such a powerful movement with Freedom School and the Cycle Breakers podcast. Can you take us back? What inspired you to leave your job and start this path?
well, miigwech, Trent, for having me on this podcast, and congrats on this new exciting project and venture. Podcasting, I know, has been such an inspiring, empowering part of my journey to sit with others, who are building something meaningful. So it's really cool to kind of be on the other side of the mic today. So miigwech, great question to start off. I started my first business in 2013, but I didn't leave my job until 2018. So there was a period of time where I was still side hustling and I was still just trying to navigate what my first business was going to become. And it was very different from what I do today. And so when I finally decided that it was time to spread my wings, if you will, and take that leap into full-time entrepreneurship, I really felt like I had learned everything I could at that present job, which for me was working as a director at a marketing agency, a digital marketing agency. So social media marketing, influencer marketing. I was seeing all of these successful entrepreneurs who were making with these transitions themselves and had built these businesses on their own terms. And I was like, okay, I think it's my time. I think it's my time to stop working for the people who are working for themselves and to do this on my own. And I had a business sense, I had a business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit for sure. And when I left, I truthfully, and I don't know that I want to recommend everyone do this, but at the same time, sometimes that blind leap of faith is actually the best thing you can do, because I didn't have this, 12-month or 5-year plan. I honestly had 3 months of known income coming in through my own business that I thought, okay, I can sustain myself for at least 3 months and I'll kind of figure it out as I go along. And what I had initially left my job in 2018 to do quickly evolved into mentorship, where other women were seeing this transition I had finally made after being inspired by others making this transition. And they were beginning to come to me asking for advice and asking if I could help them essentially turn their businesses or turn their brands, their social media presence into profit like I had. And so led into mentorship, found myself bumping up against my own limitations, because once you become an entrepreneur, you don't have that safety net. You might have savings, which I highly recommend you have some savings to fall back on, but you don't have a steady, consistent income for most of us, right? We really do have to continue building, and that reliability, that stability tends to go away, what we're used to. And so I found myself feeling all this lack and doubt and limitation. And so I wanted to be able to better serve myself, because I knew that my clients were likely experiencing a lot of those same challenges. And so to better serve them, I had to first serve me. And that's when I started studying the subconscious mind. And through this journey of my own personal growth and my own personal healing, and beginning to peel back the layers of ancestral wounding, generational wounding, childhood wounding, I started to find this rhythm and this flow. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm trying to put all of this effort and attention into the outside world with all the action and all the strategy and all the systems and all the marketing. But the greatest success I'm seeing is actually in healing my inner world, in feeling more confident and feeling more worthy and feeling more empowered. And so that's when I launched Freedom School. I realized that it isn't so much about what we do, and I'm trained, I'm educated in marketing and marketing management, but I recognize that marketing management and knowing how to put yourself out there isn't enough. It really is about what comes from the inside out. And that was, the beginning of Freedom School. And if you want to know more, I can kind of give you the details of what then happened once I launched Freedom School. But that's what inspired me to leave. And that's how I fell into mentorship all those years ago.
So when you talk about being a cycle breaker, what does that mean to you personally?
Oh, that's a great question. Again, these are questions I typically ask other people. So it's really interesting to have that turn back on myself. I really think cycle breaking is about persistence. It's about a responsibility that we as individuals have, that we also have the choice to make. I think we do have a responsibility, but not everyone is going to choose to take upon that responsibility. And that responsibility is doing things in alignment and integrity with our true self. It's doing things differently. It's daring to be different, having the courage to not just accept the quote unquote way it's always been. I hear that excuse a lot, oh, well, that's just how my dad is, or that's just how my grandpa was, or that's just how my grandma was. And recognizing that it can end with you, that cycle, that pattern, that can end with you. And I think when we reflect on Indigenous entrepreneurship or Indigenous leadership, it's a responsibility we each have to create success and prosperity and health and wealth and happiness and well-being on our own terms, and to clean up our side of the street in a good way. So it's going to look different for each of us because we all have unique histories and wounds that we're carrying. But it's a responsibility to choose to build that legacy for the next 7 generations in a good way. And do the healing necessary.
So when you say that, I know that you shared openly about struggles with self-worth and limiting beliefs. How do those experiences shape your work today?
Yeah. So I think rather than creating more shame within ourselves about those fears, those doubts, those limitations, feeling not good enough, feeling unworthy, rather than fighting with ourselves and creating more of that resistance, what I've found to be the greatest medicine is coming into acceptance that I do struggle even to this day with imposter syndrome, with fears, with doubts, with anxieties, with, feelings of not being good enough, wanting to be liked and wanting to be understood, but also recognizing that life is filled with duality and that not everyone is going to agree with me or understand me or even necessarily like me. And it's going to feel uncomfortable the more space I take up, but that I can coexist with that I have tools that allow me to accept what may be rising rather than trying to push it away or suppress it or numb it, to learn to be with it. And I think that's where the root of a lot of deeper challenges come forth, where we don't feel safe to feel the feelings and we think it's really bad to feel the feelings, but it's a part of our human experience. And it's actually a big part of our growth, our healing, and our medicine to reconcile with those parts and to also, like I said, accept them, to be at peace with them when they arise, to do our best and not make it mean anything about who we are or our worth, and commit to getting curious. Why is this coming up? What is it showing me? And what am I making it mean about me? And when you can become reflective of those layers that present themselves, there's a lot of power that you can reclaim in not letting that become your entire identity and not letting that become overcome you, like over consume you entirely. So acceptance and yeah, doing what needs to happen, and that's going to again look different for everyone, to reconcile with those darker and shadowy parts of ourselves that we might hold shame around.
So for when you started, Freedom School Co. has supported
Yeah.
women worldwide to start and scale businesses. What was your vision when you created it in 2019?
Yeah, these are great questions. So initially, I just wanted to help other women to build businesses. I wanted to show other women that you could become successful and make money on your own terms, building something that you love and that you're passionate about. And it was always rooted in empowerment. I just saw it happen in my life, and I thought, if I can share what I know with other women and empower them and support them and guide them on their own journey, because at times it can feel very lonely, then I feel like I'm living in my purpose. And I did that successfully so that was 2019 up until like 2023. It was working with women around the world. I had clients in Australia, I had clients in Southeast Asia, I had clients in Europe, in South Africa, Canada, US, even Latin America. And it was lovely, wonderful, beautiful. I'm so grateful that I've had the honor and privilege of supporting so many women, reclaim their freedom, whether it's financially, whether it's, through their health, um, their careers, their personal well-being, their relationships. But there was this turning point in 2023, and it was about 6 months after my homecoming journey. I was living in Tulum, Mexico, and suddenly my business stopped. Like I didn't feel as connected to it. And I didn't understand why, because the business had been successful and I really did love this work. But suddenly I was feeling this internal shift, this identity shift. And while living in Tulum, Mexico on Indigenous Mayan land, I heard the call from Creator that it was time to come home to the land, to the roots, to the culture of my lineage. And so embarking upon that homecoming journey also led me to the pivot of Freedom School from women around the world to predominantly Indigenous women and Indigenous entrepreneurs. So that started this whole other transitional pivotal period where I kind of felt like I didn't belong anywhere, because Creator's calling me in one direction, and then everything that I had known and everything I built felt like it was just crumbling away because it was just no longer aligned and connected to who I was becoming. But that was ultimately what started Freedom School. And even today, though I'm shifting who I work with, the foundation is still the same. I want to empower Indigenous folks. I want them to, accept who they are, reconcile with their traumas and their wounds, and be empowered to build their missions and their visions and their legacies in a good way.
So for like being said, how did NLP and hypnosis,
Hypnosis.
hypnosis, I don't know, I always think hypno, but and root cause healing change the way you approach entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So when I studied the NLP in 2019, which was the catalyst for, Freedom School being built and the catalyst for my approach to mentorship, which I call the Freedom Method, I was kind of mind blown when so NLP stands for neuro linguistic programming. It's a very fancy way of saying I studied the subconscious mind. And through that, I acquired tools, techniques, and modalities that allowed me to get to the root cause of negative emotions, limiting beliefs, and internal conflicts. So while I was already a personal development junkie, I loved reading the books, I loved listening to the podcasts, I loved watching the videos and, journaling, reading the books, all those things. But I felt like everything was a little too surface level for the challenges I was facing as an entrepreneur. I was like, I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like all this journaling and all these affirmations are just kind of keeping me stuck in this circle of toxic positivity where nothing's really changing. And so when I stumbled upon, and really it was divinely guided to NLP, which was also when I became certified in hypnosis, I suddenly had these tools that allowed me to go so much deeper and kind of opened me up to what was truly holding me back. It was so much deeper than just, something someone said to me in the schoolyard. A lot of it was ancestral. A lot of it was generational. A lot of it actually was in utero, so within the womb. And I couldn't understand how I was able to access all this wisdom and all this information. But that's the power of our subconscious minds. A lot of people don't recognize is that we have a lot of this wisdom and intelligence deep within our bodies. That's where a lot of trauma is stored, and deep within our subconscious minds. And so when we have the tools, which the NLP, and I also became a somatic therapy practitioner, I'm able to work with the mind and the body beyond our conscious awareness to access what it is that's holding us back and to heal those parts of us to move forward into our purpose with greater confidence and clarity and conviction. So it changed everything. It changed the way that I saw the world because I was healing so quickly. It changed how my clients were showing up. And it really just opened me up to this possibility for all of us. If we could get access to these tools, if more people, especially now that I work with Indigenous folks, if more Indigenous folks could access these transformative tools, then Indigenous success and prosperity no longer remains just a conversation. It becomes a reality. And that's kind of where I'm at now. That's why I'm building this Cycle Breakers movement, because I know these tools are incredibly transformative. And now it's just a matter of getting them into as many folks' hands and lives as possible to keep breaking cycles and to overcome those impacts of colonization and residential school system and oppression that many of us are still feeling the pain of.
So a lot of many Indigenous entrepreneurs face systematic barriers. We have so what have you been what have you seen what have you seen work when it comes to overcoming those barriers?
Yeah, there are a lot of systemic barriers. And I think my perspective is the more we focus on those barriers, the more we focus on the problems, we're actually creating or perpetuating more of that problem or more of that challenge. And so it's not to bypass it and avoid it and ignore it and pretend that it's not there. Like, we're not talking about denial. We actually want to identify and acknowledge what is real and what is true, but we don't want to overly identify with it as a means to keep limiting us and to keep holding ourselves back. And so in overcoming those systemic barriers that we may be facing, it's again turning the lens inward. And this is where it can become somewhat triggering or activating for people who don't want to necessarily accept that they have the power and that they are sovereign and that the agency really does come from within. It holds a mirror to what's coming up for someone. And some of those people are going to be ready. They need to be shaken up, and they need to see it for what it is, for that to spark action and to move them forward. And others need a little bit of time to kind of warm up to this notion that we are responsible for how we're letting life impact us. I really want to say that with such like delicacy, because I'm not implying that we take responsibility for what has happened. Absolutely not. I have experienced firsthand the impacts of residential school as a second generation residential school survivor. My grandfather, Billy, was a student back in the late 40s. And so I've seen how that ripples through my family. And I'm able to acknowledge and identify how those patterns and cycles and layers have shown up for me and for other family members. But I also don't want to keep perpetuating that. And so I really want to focus on solutions. And when I work with clients, they're also seeking solutions. And when we bring that power back inward, because I truly believe as within, so without. So what we heal from within, what we tend to, we can then create in the world around us. If we're not happy with the world around us, there's something within us that is creating more of that pain and more of that struggle. It's your belief system, it's your energetic system, it's, what the body and the nervous system are holding on to. So these are the layers that we tend to and we heal and we reprogram so that you can overcome those barriers. And it doesn't say they poof go away. It's that your resilience and your ability to work and coexist and move alongside barriers with greater strength and confidence and clarity and conviction, that's what we work on. So it's a mindset reframe. It's a whole system reset, essentially. And you can move through the world just with greater flexibility. And when we're in a trauma response, when we're highly reactive, we're unable to see solutions. We're only able to see with tunnel vision the problem right in front of us, and it becomes all consuming. And so I strive to create a bit more spaciousness, that we have the capacity to hold two experiences and two truths, two realities at one time. And eventually that you'll be able to default to that reality that you desire, rather than the systemic challenges and traumas as well.
So for like listeners out there, as for instance, for what you started Freedom School, you shifted because you said you got a message from the creator. And for that being said, you said you're a proud member of the Chippewas of Nawash First Nation. How has reconnecting with your roots influenced your work?
Yeah, you're asking very beautiful questions. So I want to say miigwech for that. So yeah, I'm a member of the Chippewas of Nawash First Nations, otherwise known as Nayashiningming, here in Ontario, up the Bruce Peninsula. And truthfully, reconnecting to my roots has changed my perspective on so many things, on business, on wealth creation, on leadership. It's connected me, and I think this is where my disconnection back in 2022 began. I was beginning to receive those nudges and those rumblings from Creator. And it's interesting because I was living on that Indigenous Mayan land, and I was a world traveler. I was always seeking new experiences, and I always felt like I was meant to live somewhere else. And Creator needed to get me to a place finally where, in cahoots with the Mayan ancestors and my Anishinaabe ancestors, we could finally get my attention. And so when I answered that call finally, I understood why I was feeling this disconnect, because there was a lot of decolonization in my own life that had to take place. Decolonizing my mind, decolonizing my business, really understanding who I am. I think that's probably the biggest piece that I can take away from my homecoming journey, is really coming to learn who I truly am, no longer feeling shame for my roots. I was bullied as a young girl for being Indigenous. And so I learned at a young age it wasn't safe to be expressed in my indigeneity. And so I started to really face and come to terms with, and a lot of acceptance and a lot of personal reconciliation took place in that homecoming journey. And not to mention learning the original ways and attending ceremonies in my home community and with cousins and relatives, and learning, creation stories and water songs and drummer story. Like, all of these components have strengthened who I am and have provided me with a mission far greater than myself. I am truly creator led. I know there's a day that does not go by that I'm not praying, walking and talking and praying to Creator, and building and growing alongside him, and connecting to my heart more than ever and connecting to my truth and doing as best as I can, recognizing I'm a flawed person. I have made mistakes. I continue to make mistakes, but trying to do my best every day to live in integrity and to try. One of my prayers every day is, Creator, show me how to be more like the light of you as the creator, how to be, a channel of your love and your light, to speak your love and your light, to connect. That helps me immensely, especially in times of uncertainty, which happens a lot as an entrepreneur.
So for that being said, before I get on to my next question, this is kind of
Yeah.
like in cahoots with what you're saying, because I don't know if you ever heard of The Knowledge Seeker. It's called,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's by Blair Stonechild. He's the founder of the First Nations University.
No, but
And
I'm going to write that down.
so, yeah, it's also called, so it's The Knowledge Seeker Embracing Indigenous Spirituality.
Wow. Okay. I just wrote that down. Blair Stonechild. Thank you for sharing.
So the little context of this book is that an Indigenous scholar's unique journey from the head to the heart to the spirit. And then in the book, he speaks upon, like what you're saying, like it's for
Mm,
Indigenous people, like who are growing up, as you said, as like I could easily see it because I live it, like the lens of being Indigenous. But when I moved, personal story on my end, because what you just said resonated with what kind of, like, I guess you could say a lot of reservations have in common, especially if you try to become, just in terms of like a CEO. But I've always tell people to look at the terms of what does it mean, like the acronym of like what does the beginning of CEO even mean, right? Like,
mm,
and I
ooh,
always and I always tell people that. And then people will be like, well, what does it mean? And I'm like, well, if you look it up, and then they'll look it up, and then they'll say, well, chief executive officer. And I'm like, well, what's that first word? Chief. Why did they put that in there?
mm,
Right. And then if you look at the presidency, right, as I always say, the president's code name is chief. Like he's the chief
mm,
and commander.
mm,
Why do they have that? And then even in the military, they have birds like helicopters. I just use these as reference, but they have, like, what do you call they have it's been a while since it's a rider, and it's in the Navajo Nation. They have riders, Black Hawk, I think it's called. Yeah, Black Hawk.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there's like these terminology with the in Native Americans, but they, like, even redskin, like, even though
Mm,
that's not a good term, but like they use these terminologies like it's open, right? And then and
mhm,
then I was watching this one guy, he kind of reversed it. He put on Caucasian, and then and then he started walking around, and then people were getting mad at him. Like, you're like, why you have that on your, you know? And I was like, but like and he was like, well, what about redskin, right? And then he was trying to
mhm,
educate them on that terminology of, like, because even in the native like in the States, they assume that we're gone, right? Like even here in Canada. But like, to embrace our true nature of being Indigenous, we have to start looking at the terms of why are they stealing. I always look at stealing because, and then they don't like embrace where they get that knowledge from, because our people
yeah,
before pre-colonization, we were very, I guess you could say, intelligent, and
yeah,
we don't even give ourselves like that credit, because we've been told our whole lives, like you said, like, oh, like we shouldn't be proud to be native, right? And then you get like,
mhm,
because it's not only just like, I'm not saying just you, but there's like how many of us out there that feel like this, because like you feel like you're traveling lots, because even for someone like me and everybody out there, like, I moved away from the reservation, but I always thought people know, like, I didn't choose to move away. Like
mhm,
my mom was a single mother, and she had to move away because here in the north, like I guess you could say, people, this is where dreams come to die. And that's why
mm,
a lot of people never come back when they're educated, right? And I'm not saying that it might not be like this for everywhere else, but why we have more urban reserve members than like living on off reserve than on reserve.
mhm,
And then even when people are homeless, like they'll rather live in the city and then go back to their reservation. I always ask people, like, you have a reservation? They'll be like, yeah. But I'm like, well, why are you living on the streets when they, like, you could just go
mhm,
back home, right? And then they'll say no, no, and then they create all these roadblocks. But I'm just like you say, like the
mm,
barriers in my mind. And then so I always look at the perspective of like, well, if they always take our stuff, and I'm just saying is that like, well, that's how powerful our ancestors were, like, because we're still
Mhm.
here, like speaking to each other. Be-
Yes.
Because at in the perspective of that being said, like if they were able to accomplish that, could you imagine now what we can accomplish by having all this technology, all of this
Mhm.
ability to be, like you said, who we want to be, especially in the digital age, right? Because there are like ways to make a lot of money, especially if you come from rural communities. And that was also like what I was going to ask, like, being struggling, especially coming from the like reservation, truly trying to get off,
Mhm.
right? And then coming off like not the traditional way, because and how we want to use real world actions towards like the things that we're doing, but like at the same time we're trying to balance things out. And that's why like you see
Mhm.
people struggling, because when I say, oh, I want to start a business, and then people will be like, well, you're gonna have to be this or that or this or that. Like
Mhm.
there's already things built in their mind that you got to be all of these things. And then it's just like, now in the digital age, no one's showing them that, like I said, like, and how easy it is to be what they're trying to like stop themselves from being. And that's why I always say, like, well, if you want to start a podcast, I was like, well, let's just do it. And then be like, oh no, tomorrow or the next day. And I'm like, well, you won't have that, like, that oof or whatever's pushing you today. So I always say execute something that's going to be doing something positive for you tomorrow, especially for anything. Like I always try to help people as I can, but that's why like you said, like, got to balance thing out, especially when it comes to a business and being
Yeah.
successful, as well as like being, like I said earlier, like what would you recommend for people coming from a rural community or wherever? How
Mhm.
would they be able to break out of these types of cycles just to be free? As like you say, like
Yeah.
wanting to, like, let's just say move to the city, but like how
Yeah.
are they going to do that in this day and age, right? Like in all these like barriers in front of them, especially with saying like, and how are they going to live, like, right? Because like as being entrepreneurs, we're going to have to like break cycles and also set pathways
Mhm.
for them to follow. So I'm just saying is that for what path can these people follow as being Indigenous entrepreneurs from like nation to nation, from Turtle Island to the States, from everywhere else, from like, the
Mhm.
world. Like, people want to, be reconnected with their people, as you said, but like a lot of times too, like there's so much things on the reservation that still cycles need to be broken. And
Yeah.
that's the type of stuff that I was trying to always like advocate for, especially for being where I am at right now. Like, I'm just saying is that for like me, I'm always trying to break cycles, because like you said, like you always say that you're one thing, and like, and then people say, well, you can't say that. And then you say like, well, I won't say so openly. And then people won't even
Mhm.
know that you're Native American because of the way that you are. Because growing up my whole life, I was never like this. Like I was never would say, um so curious to the point where it was like I got so used to like being, like, oh, I wanted to be this, but I've always wanted to be an inventor. I've always wanted to be someone that was
Mhm.
like thinking outside the box, because solutions to me, our problems to me were always, there's always a solution. There's always
Mm.
has to be a solution, no matter what you think it is. Because even if you do studies have shown for your body, like I always look at and ask these questions. When was the last time have you ever seen or heard a monk? I'm just saying, like a monk, like a real monk that lives in the Himalayas, come down and say like he was sick from cancer, all these things. I'm just saying, and I might not do the studies right, but if you go there and if you actually like be a part of the culture, right? A lot of people get their knowledge and they don't seek it, for themselves. They actually just, you know
Mm.
what I mean? And then when they do pay for it, they get it from the wrong type of people. And that's how I find it with our Indigenous communities. They always like hire the wrong people to come in. And it's like, what's the effects after the fact of like what
Mm.
happens to these people? Because like I'm just saying for experience, like we pay a lot of money, right? Like I'm just saying per communities, and then they don't even give back to the Indigenous entrepreneurs, let alone, but I'm not
Mm.
even to the communities. But when they do, the impacts to the communities could have been better for, like, just say they paid $30,000 for someone to come in and bring a camp for like a couple days. And let's just say, well, what happens after a year from now, 2 years from now? What impact did that camp have? And I'm just saying, well, 30,000 could probably build a home or something. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like for someone that was homeless. I'm just saying is that if they're
Yeah.
putting, and if they're not giving back to their people, like I said, and then we're not able to advocate. And that's why I mean, like, there is no safe space in general, because there's still a lot of people in these spaces of being lost, right? So, and
Mhm.
my mission also is to also try to free, I guess you could say, similar as what you said, like free people's minds. And that's why I always try to let people read books. But you know how a lot of Indigenous people too, their English isn't like their first language. And that's also another barrier. And that's why technology is always important. I always find tech out there, and there's like what you call a SCOBot. I don't know. I'm not being advertised for these things, but like SCOBot, I don't know. They're out in Ontario, and there's a couple of Indigenous engineers. They built this little bot, and then like for instance, let's just say they say that communities can contact them, but it has to be your chief and council. And if they approve this type of proposal, they can input all of your language into this bot, and it's kind of like an Alexa in my perspective. And it's like you can be able to talk with it, and it'll be able to translate into English. So,
Wow.
and then,
Cool.
so I mean, barriers like that would be able to start teaching people, for instance, like in far rural communities, because
Yeah.
those are the people, a lot of them need to be taught in the ways of being in the real world today, right? Like you say, because the real world will eventually come to them. And I always say that to them, like, no matter how isolated you might think you are, if you're talking to me on a phone and a satellite or whatever, you're not that isolated as you think, because even tribes to this day are being found and people are going to these tribes and thinking it's all cool. But I'm just saying is that like YouTubers and all these, but it's just for the views. I'm just saying is that like a Native American like myself, or like or for you or for anybody, right? If they did that, I always look at, well, who's popping off in the Native American space as for creators on YouTube? But there's not as much, but on TikTok, there's always a lot. So like, you know, there's a market for a lot of people, but people just don't know where to go. And I always try to navigate them to the right places. So for being on the podcast, I like to always say for a lot of our listeners out there, like it's always possible as long as you just never give up, because you never know, the creator might send you messages, and these messages you might not know how to navigate. And that's why within the book of the Knowledge Seeker, he says these things like of being, I guess you can say, I always say like a dud, but it's like, you know, and how like you, as you said, you're calling, like you answered it. And then, so a lot of us Indigenous people, we don't answer the calling. So, I mean, and then that's where I sit at today. Like from when I got into my accident, I literally promised the creator, I literally promised him. And here I sit today. And then that's why even just before I got into this meeting with you, I always think about like, well, like I don't run on anything. Like I'm not saying I'd run my time or anything, but on computers, but I always run it, I guess you could say, on the creator's time. That's why they always say Indian time. And that's why a lot of why people don't understand these terms is because, like you said, when you free your mind and the terminology of you said, like for our Indigenous people, this is why pathways and everything don't work, because westernized and everything else is still being alive, like still alive in our communities to this day. Like you look at it, like I said earlier, I'm not saying these organizations, but I'm just saying is that where is the impact after the fact? Right? Because like if they were impacted by Indigenous corporations or businesses like yourselves or anything like that, I'm just saying is that like the benefits would be better, because they're actually involving people that are impacted by it every day, not just like on a daily basis. Like, you know, especially if you're just saying like, well, I'm an urban reserve member, because I'm just saying perspective wise, like, you know, there's a lot of benefits to living economically in the city. But I'm saying in rural communities, and how much, you know, our brothers and sisters are out there that have a lot of artistic, you know, abilities to sell online e-commerce stores, right? And like, I'm just saying is that there should be so much wealth shared, even if it might not be shared by the government. As you said, like when it comes to healing and everything, nation to nation working, I find that this is probably the best way to work with a lot of the nations, is by just giving your knowledge for free, instead of always seeking some sort of like payment. I always find, because especially being Indigenous, like how did our ancestors do it? We had a lot of things that they wanted, and we still do, and that's healing. Spirituality is one of the biggest things that us Native Americans have advanced in, more than majority of, I say, other, I guess you should say, nations, because they don't even look at us. Because look at it this way, they think that we're gone, but we're not. We're literally everywhere. Like everywhere. We're everywhere. We're, if you look at every history, there's a Native American there. Like I always look at the fact of like, look on both sides. When America fought Canada, like the British, like I always ask them this, like, what is a sovereign nation to you, right? And they'll say, well, Canada. And I'm like, Canada's not even a sovereign nation. Like it's the UK and us. And you're wherever you're from. So in your treaty card, it says, if mine says Buffalo River Dene Nation, yours, if you have a treaty card or whatever, yours will say your nation, where you come from. And if you can say it in your tongue, like if I could say my language and my tongue, when you ask people where I'm from, they'll say, well, where are you from? And now they'll say, I am Dene, but I can't say it in my tongue because those barriers, as you said, my mom went to residential school and I was in like, you know what I mean? My grandmother was the only last person to speak, no English. It wasn't even me and my grandmother. She taught me spirituality at a young age, and I could only speak by her with my eyes and her smile
Mm,
and like by sitting with her. And that was the only way because that barrier was there. But I'm saying is that taught me a lot. And by saying that, I'm just saying as being what you're saying earlier, by being empowering yourself, by saying where you originally come from. And a lot of people don't even say that. They don't even say, well, I'm Indigenous. And then, like you said, because there's still a lot of those barriers to this day that a lot of what I say, even though if there's truth and recognition, I always let people know, even if you wear an orange shirt day, those problems don't go away, right? They're still there every single day. And, for us Indigenous people, and even when it comes to these truth and recognition, I always let people know, is it truly like, for our people? Because if it was, there'd be more businesses. We would be more ownership of our own land. We would have more things that, should have been shared. And, and that's why I always let people know empowerment comes from your community. But if your community is not empowering each other, you got to start with your community first. And that's why I always like try and be like, an example. And unfortunately, I might not be close to a city, but like now we live in the digital world age. So this is why I started a podcast. And for a lot of us Indigenous people, I just wanted to know, like, and how would you be able to break these types of cycles within your own community for like healing with your own family? Like, you know what I mean? Like for a lot of us, we also like, take advantage of like having someone today and then tomorrow they might be gone. And then that's when we deal with those issues, but it might not be in a proper way. And that's why we have alcoholism, right? And like a lot of our Indigenous people might not be dealing with it in a proper way. And they always say, well, get off your high horse, just why won't you come out and do these things with me? Because to them, they think that's healing, but it's not, right? Because it's more of like causing your pain to suffer in the long term. And that's why like my mother, she took her social work and then she was also a healer, right? So growing up, I was very, I guess you could say intuitive. I guess you could say I was questioning things like, why is this? Why is that? This and that. And then like I always was also like around teachers my whole life. So like, people that had like their PhDs and all these things, like, and they weren't even Indigenous, like, some of them were like non-Indigenous. So I got to learn about the world without even leaving the bush really in the beginning. So like I always ask people these questions like, in your whole life of like trying to reconnect with your Indigenous roots, I would just ask, how would you give out there for these people trying to escape these same barriers that we speak upon? Like what would be one advice that you would give them?
yeah, thank you for sharing all of your personal reflections as well. And that like you're asking very great questions. And I think what I would say simply is I understand that communities still carry pain and burdens and traumas of the past. And I think sometimes we can feel like no one understands our big vision, especially when we are solutions oriented. And it can be a little bit of that tall poppy syndrome, feeling like we're being criticized or judged for wanting to break out of those patterns and cycles. And then comes those layers of worrying that we might be rejected or abandoned or isolated from our families. And it's something I've experienced. I know it's something countless folks have experienced. And I don't want to say that this is the only way forward, but I think it's really important that we do surround ourselves. If you can find one person in your community who aligns and believes and trusts in you and your vision and your mission, and can share in that belief with you. If you can't find someone in your community, like you said, we're connected to the digital world. I have encountered so many incredible, inspiring, empowering Indigenous women, Indigenous leaders, Indigenous entrepreneurs who are expanding my vision of what's possible. They're showing me, it's possible because they've paved their own path, and that inspires and energizes and invigorates me. And so I just want to acknowledge that, yeah, I think this is something nation and nation that people do face, but it's not to blame anyone or to shame anyone. It's just the reality of what colonization has done for our peoples. But find a support system, whether it's an elder or a knowledge keeper or a medicine man or woman or a cousin or an auntie or a relative, someone in your community. If not, there's a digital community. There's a vast online realm of really incredible Indigenous folks who are doing really incredible, empowering things. And I think if you can align yourself and connect with, or even just be in their realm because they're showing you what is possible, do that as best as you can. Because yeah, it's easy to get kind of sucked into the pattern and the cycle of those that we are in closest proximity to. And sometimes it's not accessible or available to us in this moment to uproot and leave and to move to an urban space. That actually might create more trauma for the individual. So it's not necessarily about uprooting. It's just about opening yourself up to a support system or a network of folks who can hold space for you, and maybe indirectly as well. Maybe it's someone you follow, so you've never had that one-on-one connection with them, but just someone who can hold that mirror to you to let you know that, even if you're a res kid, here's what can happen for you. There's so many of those beautiful success stories. There's so many up there. And so I implore you to find who that might be, those expanders for you, those support systems for you. That is, I think, the advice I want to offer. It's really, really important to find yourself a circle that meets you where you're at, and to not buy into the narratives that other people might project onto you because they haven't yet done or tried to go for what you are. So yeah, keep shining bright, keep dreaming big, and find your people.
So if you worked with hundreds of women, what patterns do you see between those who succeed and those who hold themselves back?
Well, I think to a degree, everybody holds themselves back. And so I'll share what commonly holds folks back, and it's imposter syndrome, fear of being seen, unworthiness, shame, like lack mentality, so poverty consciousness. Yeah, a lot that's connected to worth, fear of being rejected. Yeah, healer wounds. So I see a lot of really gifted, intuitive women who are afraid to, let their gifts be known. So I see a whole slew, but definitely imposter syndrome and fear of being seen, which everything kind of stems down to unworthiness, not feeling good enough. So we try to work from the root up. And so it's not a matter of, some succeed and some don't. It's a matter of just bringing to light those deeper layers and, yeah, having tools and resources that support you in continuing to overcome whatever that core wound might be for you. But yeah, I think the imposter syndrome is something that a lot of Indigenous folks struggle with.
Could you explain a little bit to our listeners what imposter syndrome means? Because they might not know what that means.
Yeah, that's great. So I would describe imposter syndrome as that little voice in your head that asks, who am I to do this? Who am I to start a business? Who am I to leave the res? Who am I to become successful? Who am I to make more money than anyone in my family? Who am I to become educated? Who am I? So you don't feel like you are capable or qualified or worthy of deserving of what it is that is on your heart. And so we have to remember that Creator has gifted us each a unique desire and destiny and dream, because we are meant to step into that. And so that imposter syndrome, especially for Indigenous folks, because of the reality of feeling like we don't belong, right? Being of two worlds, and what's happened to our ancestors because of colonization, because of residential schools, we struggle with our identity. And so because of that, we often feel like an imposter. We often then feel like we don't deserve that seat at the table. We don't deserve to take that next step forward. So if that narrative shows up as who am I to ... that's imposter syndrome. That's at the basis what imposter syndrome looks like.
So I love how you bridge ancestral wisdom with modern leadership. Can you share an example of what that looks like in a practice?
Yeah. So when it comes to, I call it like weaving the modern and the medicine, I like to consider in our Anishinaabe culture the seven sacred teachings. And I like to use those as like pillars or frameworks for bringing into leadership, bringing into communication, bringing into sovereignty. And when we look at these seven values, that's essentially what they are. And look at them as these guideposts for how to live life culturally connected while navigating the modern world. That's what it looks like. And so I did a workshop for an organization at West last week where it was all about Indigenous leadership. And it was to a group of Indigenous employees at this company. And I walked through the framework of the seven sacred teachings through the lens of Indigenous leadership to show us how valuable it is to have Indigenous leadership representation in corporations, because we have such a beautiful and unique way of looking at the world. And when we bring those values, such as humility and respect and honesty, truth, these foundational pillars and values into a corporate space, which is all about capitalism and the bottom line, we start to see solutions in that capitalistic structure where there's room for us to fit in, where we can be valued for what our ancestors had to offer, and we get to then bring it into our modern spaces, our workplaces, in a way that can be respected, in a way that does create more good than harm, where we can begin to really think as community oriented rather than individualistic, where we create more harmony than harm. So hopefully that answered it. I mean, I could probably go a lot deeper, but I want to be mindful of our time.
Yeah, and that's why, like I just said, what daily practice or mindset shifts that have helped you the most in your
Mhm.
journey?
Yeah. So that is really important to note, that it is a daily journey. It is a daily practice. So things that work for me are going out for a walk. So simple, but I'm going to go for a hike after this just to get into nature. I'm in the middle of a move, I'm in transition. And yeah, life has been lifing, business has been, busy. And so for me, that's my time to ground in nature, to connect to creator, to, kind of just almost purifies and cleanses me. Things like meditation, which I don't do every single day, and I'm okay with that. I used to force myself to do it daily, but I recognize that I have to tune into what my body needs. So non-negotiable would be a walk, some form of mindfulness like meditation or journaling helps me every day, but what that practice or what that activity is will be different. I really honor like what I need. If I need, you know, more action and energy because I've got a lot of pent up, I don't know, stress or anxiety, I need to move through. But there are other times where I just need to sit, maybe it's reading a book and just being. Sometimes it's even driving in my car. Being in the car sometimes is like the most meditative thing I can do. But regardless of what you feel is best for you, because having a mindfulness practice really helps support your nervous system, really helps you to regulate and calm, to respond to life instead of react. So that could be drumming, that could be singing, that could be humming, that could be tapping, which is one of the modalities I do. It could be meditation, it could be dancing, right? It could be any number of activities that feel good for you. And I actually find, and most of my clients find themselves coming back to something they loved to do when they were little children. And they bring that back into their lives as adults. And that's incredibly healing and regulating and nurturing to our system. So I'm not going to say you have to do this, but what I will say is have a daily practice of some sort and have a daily connection point, daily conversation, communication, prayer to creator. That has become a non-negotiable for me, and it's transformed my life in ways I can't even explain, because creator is good, and he wants the best for us. He also wants us to work with him, right? To communicate with him. So Yeah.
And that's why, like, for us here listening today, like for the Cycle Breakers podcast, what inspired you to start it? And the conversations, what type of conversations are you most excited about amplifying?
Yeah. So I think similar to you with the RezToCEO podcast, I wanted to sit down with and learn from other Indigenous leaders, change makers, entrepreneurs, cycle breakers, people who are doing really notable work and who are breaking free from, you know, uh, their pain, who are defying the odds, who are building their own movements and missions and legacies and wanting to create change for the collective, who are wanting to advance Indigenous success, prosperity, well-being. And I wanted to learn. Really, it was an opportunity for me to build relationships and for me to, kind of selfishly pick their brains to be like, tell me more about you and what got you to where you're at today. And from it, I've formed beautiful friendships and connections and relationships, and I'm grateful for that. But above all, I think what I'm the most proud of with it is that it's not just a conversation held privately between me and the other person. It gets to be listened and heard and seen by others who need that medicine as well. And so it feels really gratifying to be able to like share that wisdom and knowledge with others, and hearing the feedback from the listeners to say, wow, like that conversation with so and so was like everything I needed right now. Like that spoke right to my heart. So yeah, it's not about specific types of stories. It's just I want to feel someone's heart, and I want to feel their spirit, and I want to hear about their journey, because a lot of the journeys are not linear, and a lot of them come from a lot of pain and hardship. And so I think that's really inspiring for us to hear, as we're building our missions and movements, just like I think you're doing here, Trent.
Well, thank you for that. And then for you, for what do you hope your legacy will be for Indigenous women and entrepreneurs coming after you?
Ooh, okay, great questions. I might have to, reflect on that on my walk a bit more, but you know, I really do hope, like right now I can say like what comes through is that there's this ripple effect of, I know that this mission I'm on is bigger than me. I just happen to be, guiding it right now. But my hope is that I continue to teach and share these tools and these technologies and these frameworks with other Indigenous entrepreneurs and women and leaders, and that they then share those with their networks. And it just continues to ripple on and on and on. And that, by the time, my children and grandchildren come into this world, that they don't have to endure as much pain and hardship as I did. Yet they'll have their own unique pain and hardship they have to go through. I know that's part of our human experience, but that it is filled with more resilience and courage and strength, and that they know that they have, everything that they need to thrive. That Yeah, that generational success and wealth has been built, and they don't have to struggle in the same ways that I have. So yeah, it's about that ripple effect. I think that's the biggest part.
Well, Rachel, thank you for sharing your story and wisdom today. For anyone who wants to connect with you, where is the best place that they can find you?
Thank you, Miigwech Trent, for having me. And I was so excited when I saw that you were creating a podcast. And I really do feel honored that you've reached out and asked me to be a part of this show. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me there. It's my full name, Rachael Hunt. And then on Instagram, it's Freedom Rach with two H's, so Rach H. So you can connect with me on Instagram as well. And then, of course, through the Cycle Breakers podcast, which is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So, yeah, I would love to hear from you and connect with anyone who feels compelled.
Thank you for listening to another episode of RezToCEO. If this conversation inspired you, share it with someone who needs it to hear it. And remember, breaking cycles creates legacies.
Miigwech.